Whether you're a beginner just getting started with watercolor and you're looking for exercises to help you improve your water and brush control so that you can paint those large washes faster for better results, or you've simply always wanted to try an abstract painting but you just don't know where to start, don't know how to go about creating an abstract piece, today's exercise is for you. Today, I am sharing a full abstract painting workshop for beginners. I am taking you through my entire process, starting with how I come up with my abstract composition, using simple and fast thumbnail sketches, to how I choose specific paint colors based on a color scheme in order to arrive at harmonious results, to how I bring the piece to life using bright watercolor washes. If you give this exercise a go, I would absolutely love to see it. If you're over on Instagram and you want to share over there, please do. Just make sure to tag me at Erica_Lancaster_art so that I can actually see it and cheer you on. I am loving sharing your work over on my stories. All right, with all that said, let's jump in. Let's work on some quick thumbnails. I would recommend at least working on 3 to 5 quick thumbnails. They don't have to be perfect. Thumbnails are incredibly helpful. They're just quick little sketches that you can do in order to get your ideas down on paper so that you can actually see what your little composition is going to look like. You can play with the different elements of art that we're going to be bringing into this one, which are primarily color, shape, and line. Play with different arrangements, different sizes, how things are cropped out, everything like that you can really explore via thumbnailing. And once you have created a few different thumbnails, then you can choose the one that you like best and actually transfer that sketch onto your final paper that you're going to be using. This is going to make it a lot more likely that you're going to actually end up with a final piece that you'll like, and it's going to help you stretch your creative muscles. When I was in art school, I had professors that had me fill up entire sketchbook pages with 25, 30 or more little thumbnails before they even allowed us to get started with the final piece. And honestly, I'm incredibly thankful that they kind of challenged us and forced us to do this because it grew my creative muscles so much. I created 6 little rectangles, and I created rectangles because I'm going to be working in this size of watercolor sheet for my final piece, which is a rectangle. So whatever kind of format you're going to be using for your final piece, if it's a square, create squares. If it's a rectangle, make sure that you create rectangles. If you're going to be working horizontally, then make sure that your rectangles are horizontal rectangles, meaning the width is greater than the height. If you're going to be working with your rectangle in a vertical format, a vertical direction, then make sure that your thumbnail are vertical rectangles. Your sketches are going to look different from mine. I don't want you to copy what I'm doing. I want you to use your own creativity and bring in your own ideas. But you can certainly get ideas from how I am making use of shape, line, positioning, and all those kinds of things if you would like. So for these abstract pieces, I am mostly going to be bringing in circles in different sizes, lines, and as I said, color. So for this first one, perhaps I'm going to create a large circle here. And if you notice that your sketches get better and better as you move along, that's a good thing, right? That means you're doing something right. Okay, so mostly I am kind of dividing my area into large spaces first. So I am bringing in large shapes, lines, and it's really about coming back to see the entire thing as a whole and making sure that you're not adding way too many lines or way too many shapes, because if we do add in way too many lines or shapes, then we're not going to be able to effectively practice our watercolor techniques. You don't want to be left with super teeny tiny sections that are not going to allow you to practice your watercolor techniques later. So here's one sketch. I think that these are enough lines and shapes. So I'm going to start with the next. And with this one, how about adding in a cropped circle? I want to play with positionings and like bringing certain elements off the page, out of that area. And if you want, you can bring in squares and rectangles or whatever kind of simple shape you'd like. But try not to overcomplicate things for yourself. Keep it simple. Oftentimes, simple is best. Maybe I add a smaller circle in here. Maybe one last smaller circle here. Coming back to see everything as a whole. And really asking myself if I should be adding more or if that's enough. I'm gonna move on to the next one. Maybe with this one, I start with a line. Gonna add in my first circle here. I think I'm missing a circle somewhere. I'm gonna place it right in the middle of this line, just like I did over here. And I think that's... So for this one, I'm gonna try to place a cropped circle coming up off the page. And then I'm gonna start dividing this large space into smaller spaces with lines. Sometimes my lines run straight across from side to side or edge to edge, and sometimes they don't. Sometimes they just reach another line and I end it right there. Just allow yourself to intuitively play and explore interesting effects or arrangements that you can create with just line and shape. And another thing that I am staying away from is placing elements right in the middle or dividing my space into equal top and bottom halves or equal left and right halves. If you notice, I've never placed a line right in the middle, like a vertical, and I've never placed a horizontal right in the middle. And the reason why I'm staying away from that is because that creates more of a static look and feel. It's more boring to look at, and I'm really going for more of an asymmetrical balance here. I'm gonna add in an extra circle into this one. All right, there we go. Maybe this one has a smaller, like off-center circle inside of it like that. I feel like I'm missing one last line. Moving on to the next. So here, let me think of something different that I haven't done. So I'm gonna do kind of medium-sized circle there, and then perhaps I have a smaller circle coming out, kind of overlapping that one, and then a larger circle down here. I really like it when I kind of crop out sections of my circles. It's a lot more interesting when something is coming off the page versus trying to cramp everything into the space. But we'll see if I can create something that looks interesting even if I haven't cropped a section out for one of my circles. Okay, I think that's enough elements for that one. I'm gonna move on to my last thumbnail. So let's see, what can I do different here? I'm gonna start with one line at an angle like that. I'm gonna create another line coming down. Perhaps for this one, my cropped circle is gonna be down here. Maybe a smaller circle inside of that one. And need another circle here. I feel like I need another circle somewhere. Maybe this one covers up that line. All right, so as you can see, now I have 6 different abstract compositions that I can go ahead and transfer onto my sheet of watercolor paper. And another thing that you can use your thumbnails for is to at least explore how you're going to be using contrast and value in your final pieces. And what I mean by this is you don't necessarily have to use them to plan your colors, though I would recommend making sure that you plan the color scheme that you're going to be using before getting started with the final piece. But for example, let's just say that in this area, I want to use a dark color, very dark, rich, deep color right here. And then perhaps I want to use that same color or the same a similar value to what I would be using over here in this space. Or let's just say that I want to make it darker. So I go ahead and layer that graphite so that I can see what it looks like. Let's just say that I want to create a similar value to this one in this area over here, so I can fill it in with a similar value that I've created in this section over here so that I can see what it looks like. How about this space? Maybe I want a same super deep, rich, dark value like this one over here, and I go ahead and fill this section in. Maybe I want to use that same very dark, rich, deep value in this area over here. So I go ahead and cover that up with my graphite. Maybe I want this area right here to be very, very light in value. So I just go ahead and cover that, fill that in with a light application of graphite. Maybe this section over here can be even lighter than that. So I go in with a very, very subtle application of graphite. How about this area? Maybe I also want a very, very light value right here. Maybe here I want it to be super dark as well. Even though I'm not even bringing in color yet, I'm already starting to plan the different values that I'm going to be creating throughout my piece. And value, as I've explained before, is super important in order to create contrast and interesting effects in your pieces. So even without color, you're still starting to think of the values that you're going to be creating via your different colors that you're going to be bringing in later. So your color palette that you choose for your final piece is totally up to you. You can even decide to create a monochromatic final piece with just one single color. I would recommend bringing in a specific color scheme. So you can go with a triad, a tetrad, a complementary color scheme, a split complementary color scheme, any of those. Okay, so I'm just going to be filling in a few different values for this third one, and then I'm just going to choose the one that I'm going to be going with for my final piece so that we can get started with that. But take as long as you need to with this thumbnail process. I see so many beginners skip over the preparation phase before getting started with the final piece and put a lot of pressure on themselves to create perfection without having done any practice, any exploration, any play work at all before getting started. And this is the kind of prep work that I do whether I'm working on something that's completely abstract or something that is representational or figurative. Thumbnails work awesome for planning your visual compositions and making sure that you like your visual composition before starting with the final piece. I'm just gonna go ahead and pick my favorite so that we can get started. This is the one that I'm going to be using for my final piece. If you want to make slight changes to it, you can go ahead and do that before doing your transferring. So for example, with this one, if I want to get rid of this empty little corner here, then I would have to make this circle here slightly larger so that I can really bring it off the page completely. If I want to change any line angle slightly, I can go ahead and do that. That is perfectly okay. And I'm going to be using a B pencil grade, which is harder than this 4B. This is way too soft of a graphite to use on my watercolor paper, especially if I don't want my graphite to show at the end of the painting process. So for my actual transferring, I'm going to be using a B pencil grade. All right, so I have my thumbnail sketch right over here in front of me off camera. That's what I'm looking at. And to do my transferring, I will be bringing in a ruler. But make sure that as you're using your ruler to create your long lines, that you're not pressing down too hard on your paper, okay? Because then your pencil lines are going to be super visible at the end. And because we're pressing down on our ruler so that it doesn't move, we tend to press harder with this other hand as well. All right, so I'm just going to place my ruler similar to that angle for that first line in this page. Okay, and there's my first line. You can see how I created it very lightly because I don't want it to show at the end. I'm gonna go ahead and get started with another line that I see in my sketch up here, which is kind of like that. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and draw the large circle down here. I'm just gonna make some tick lines for myself here so that I can kind of get it where I want it to be and as large as I want it to be. Otherwise, it's gonna be difficult for me to draw this circle where I want it and as big as I want it. If you're not so good at drawing circles and you wanna use a circular object that you have around your house for help to trace over, go ahead and do that. That is perfectly okay. You're just gonna have to find an object that is similar in size to what you need. Another thing that you can use is, of course, a compass, something like that. Not all of us have compasses at home. Just gonna go ahead and connect these. So if this were going off the page, let me just check to see that this is a good circle. Modify this curve a little bit. Make sure that your eraser is clean if you're going to be using it on your watercolor sheet. Drawing circles when they are cropped out of the page or area like this, for me, is way harder because I can't visualize that entire path that I have to draw for my circle because part of it is cut out. I have a smaller circle inside of this one. I am going to place tick marks for myself in here, so that my circle, again, can have the size that I want it to have and is in the location that I want it to be. Now I need another circle over here. So this one is overlapping over this one. And now that I'm drawing this one, I find it to be too similar in size to the smaller circle that I was just drawing before, this one over here. I don't like that. And in my sketch, you can see how this circle is smaller than this circle. And I didn't do that in my final transferring. So I am going to go ahead and make this one smaller. So I'm missing a couple of lines. I'm missing this one over here and this one here. This line actually extends all the way to the edge. Then I have a smaller circle here, cut right in half by that diagonal, and I have the smallest circle right here near the corner. I'm going to take my kneaded eraser. You can see how my lines that I went over more times look way darker and more feathery than the other lines that I created with my ruler. I'm a little bit more similar in lightness before starting with my painting process. I'm going to clean up my drawing here, cleaning up any feathery lines. If there's anything that you want to add into your sketch at this point, you can go ahead and do that. Any smaller shapes that you want to add in or break in larger sections into, you can do that if you feel it will help your composition look better. Just remember not to go overboard with the small details, at least not so small that you won't be able to practice your watercolor techniques. Maybe I want to create a parallel line to this one here, kind of like that, and maybe this one does extend all the way to this corner of the page. Maybe here I have something similar, kind of going like that. So I now have over 13 spaces that I can practice my watercolor techniques in that have a wide range of sizes, and I'm also going to be able to practice painting in shapes that have angular straight lines to them and shapes that have curves to them, which is also a plus. So once you're ready, let's go ahead and start picking out our colors. Let's go ahead and pick our color scheme that we're going to be using for our new abstract piece. I would highly recommend keeping it simple, using a limited amount of colors, and if you can, go with an actual color scheme. So what I mean is pick an analogous color scheme, a complementary color scheme, split complementary, triad, tetrad, square, whatever you'd like. It can even be monochromatic with one single color. But these color schemes also lead to very harmonious, integrated, beautiful end results. Exploring these color schemes that have been used by artists throughout history is very, very helpful for us. So for this one, personally, I think I'm gonna go with a tetrad, otherwise known as a split complementary color scheme, meaning you have a rectangle arrangement or positioning in the color wheel. So in other words, two pairs of two opposite colors sitting across from each other in the color wheel, right? Anywhere where you can draw a rectangle, that is a split complementary color scheme. So the specific colors that I am going to be picking for my split complementary scheme is yellow-green, blue-green, red-violet, and red-orange. I'm going to use my size 10 paintbrush, and I'm going to decide how I'm going to be creating those four colors. So for my yellow-green, I'm going to use Hansa Yellow Light, which is a cool yellow. And I'm going to use my Undersea Green, add it into there. Okay, so that's how I'm going to be creating my yellow-green. Now, aside from my yellow-green, I'm going to need a blue-green. So for my blue-green, I'm going to take my phthalo blue, and I'm going to take a little bit more of my Undersea Green to get it a little bit more green. Phthalo blue is already a cool blue, but I want to get it more towards a little bit more green, more towards the blue-green side. All right, so let's see. That's a pretty nice blue-green there. So you can decide if you want to add more of whichever color you need. That's a very nice blue-green. So I now know how I'm going to be creating my yellow-green and my blue-green. And now I'm going to go ahead and create my warmer colors over here on this other side of my palette. So for my red-orange, I'm going to go with this Hansa Yellow Deep. And I'm going to add in a tiny bit of my Pyrrole Scarlet, which I have right here, so that I can get it a little bit more towards the orangish side. And add in a little bit more of my Pyrrole Red. That's beautiful. This is a nice red-orange right there. The only color I'm missing now is my red-violet. I am going to be using Quin Rose. And I'm going to add in a little bit of my ultramarine into it to get it towards the purple side. This is a beautiful purple. I'm going to add a little bit more of my Quin Rose into it so that I can get it more towards the reddish side, and I think that this will do great. Beautiful. That's a beautiful red purple there. Color wheels are super handy to have if you ever need to see what that specific color that you need to make looks like. You can just grab your color wheel and try to create something that is similar to the color that you see in the color wheel. So for my group of tetrads that I chose, I have my yellow-green, I have my blue-green, I have my red-orange, and I have my red-violet right here. That is really all I need to create a beautiful color scheme in my abstract piece. Now, of course, this is by no means all of the paint that I'm going to be using throughout this painting process. I'm going to be making more of my little puddles of color as they run out, but
Now I know exactly which colors I need to reach for each one of these colors that I'm going to be using in my color scheme. So I'm going to make sure not to bring in another red in my red orange. And I know exactly which blue I'm going to be using in my red purple. I know exactly which blue I'm going to be using in my blue green. I am not going to be randomly grabbing any other colors. Now, of course, as you create more of your mixtures, I might end up using a yellow green that is slightly more green or slightly contains more yellow than this initial one, or maybe my blue green at some point when I'm creating my color mixture, I just use it in a slightly different way. Maybe it has more blue in it than it had before, or whatever the case may be. It's okay to have variation within your different colors in your color scheme in your piece. Just make sure that those variations are happening, because the ratio of your two colors, or the percentage of your two colors in your mixtures, are slightly modified as you're creating your different colors, and that those variations are not happening because you're using or you're bringing in another color altogether. That's very different. So let's get started with the painting process. And before doing that, I'm going to go ahead and change my water. These are the two paintbrushes that I'm going to be using. This is a size 10 round brush and a size 16, and I'm just going to be changing between them as I go, tackling all of these different shapes that have these different sizes. So make sure that you choose the right paintbrush for the job on hand. Don't make the process harder than it needs to be. Before jumping into a new space that you're going to be painting or shape that you're going to be painting, notice its size, notice its characteristics, its complexity, and make sure that you're choosing a paintbrush that is appropriate for that size of shape or area. If you try to fill in a large area with a very small brush, even let's say that I try to fill in this large area, this large circle with this size 10 round brush, that is going to be super aggravating, because with a smaller brush, you're not going to be able to load up your paintbrush effectively with a good amount of paint and water in order to paint quickly. You're going to have to reload and come back and reload and come back and reload and come back. And every time you do that, your paper is already drying. So it's likely that if you use a small paintbrush, or a paintbrush that is too small for the area on hand, you're going to end up with texture and lines and stuff like that you probably don't want. So I would recommend going with the largest paintbrush size that you can get away with for that area, if that makes sense. All right, so I have my clean water beside me, I have my absorbent towel, and my two brushes. I'm just gonna start with a small area. How about this one right here? Prepare my paintbrush bristles by swiveling my paintbrush in my container of water. I'm taking a small amount of paint, and I'm just gonna go in and start with this shape right here. I'm going to try my best to leave a sliver of white paper unpainted in the outer edges of each shape, or along the outer edges of each shape, so that I can have a kind of white outline. I think that'll make for a nice looking kind of effect. There you go. So that's my yellow-green. You can see how I left a little sliver of paper all around this shape. And this is still nice and wet because I've been going over it at least 2 to 3 times. You can go ahead and leave it like that. If you notice that your paint is already starting to dry, I would not recommend doing anything else if you notice that your paint is starting to dry. But if not, you can go ahead and drop in a little bit more of this color to darken certain areas. And if you drop it in while that initial layer of paint is still wet, you'll notice that you'll get nice, soft, diffused out effects. Inversely to that, if you're working in a very small shape, or relatively small the way that I am, and you notice that you go in with way too much paint or water, remove that paint from your paintbrush bristles, use your absorbent towel, and you can go in to do some lifting. See that? See how I lightened that area by soaking up some of that excess water and pigment? You can always help yourself by using the clean and slightly damp bristles of your paintbrush to do a tiny bit of lifting whenever you need to. So you can jump on to using a new color, or you can continue painting in a few more shapes with the same first color that you started with. That's totally up to you. this triangle up here. I'm gonna try once again, do my best to paint quickly and simultaneously to that, leave a sliver of white edge around my shape. Load up your paintbrush bristles with more paint as you go. As you notice that your paintbrush bristles start to run out of color, quickly load up your paintbrush and pick up from that edge where you left off before it dries. Okay, so I'm running over everything 3 to 4 times right here with just a damp paintbrush, making sure that everything remains wet a little bit longer. And I'm dropping in a little bit more of this color in certain spaces to get in a little bit of variation in color and saturation there in every shape. I'm gonna make a little bit more of this color, gonna drop in a little bit more of my Hansa yellow light. When we're painting with watercolor, usually, even though a flat wash is something that we should know how to do, and it certainly exists, and there's certainly a time and place for flat washes, most of the time we're going for at least somewhat of a slight variation in saturation or translucency levels when we're painting with watercolor. So I am making sure that everywhere in all of my spaces that I start painting in, I have somewhat of a variation in translucency and saturation. How do I do that? By initially going in with a very light pale color, making sure that I'm just taking a little bit from maybe the edge of my puddle, or maybe even adding a little bit more water into my puddle if I think it's way too thick and saturated. And once I have that initial lighter layer in and it's still wet, I then drop in a little bit more of that color into certain areas to darken those areas. Or I can also do lifting the way that I did in both of these. I lifted up a little bit of excess color at the very end, so that again, I create lighter value areas, more translucent areas, and I have darker value areas, more saturated areas. That is what creates this beautiful sensation of light and shadow and dimension when we're working with watercolor. So you're gonna notice that none of my sections or spaces that I paint in are flat. Going to continue filling in more spaces with this yellow-green. You can see how I am going over the entire area here several times so that this initial layer can be nice and wet when I drop in more of my color. There we go. I've arrived at a nice even sheen here. So I can now drop in a little bit more of this yellow-green. Putting in a little bit more of my undersea green in my yellow-green color mixture. So you can see how there's a slight variation here going on in this circle, where some sections look a little bit more yellow-green, while other sections perhaps are looking a little bit more like a normal, more secondary green, secondary color green. Removing that color from my paintbrush bristles, removing that excess water, and doing a little bit of cleaning up of edges here, as well as maybe some lifting. And there we go. All right, I don't want to start overworking this section or anything, so going to continue working on my yellow-green areas. So I'm going to start with a different color here. I removed all of my green from my paintbrush bristles, and I'm going to use my same size 10 round brush to paint in my red-orange areas. Paint in this section right here. And again, I'm trying to avoid the edges. Going over all of this red-orange area a few times. And now that I have a nice even sheen in all this area, I'm going to go ahead and drop in more of my red-orange. And there we go. Nice red-orange section with a good variation in translucencies and values in that area. How about this area here? Very, very small section. The smaller the area, the more difficult it is to stay on top of water control. So help yourself with your absorbent towel as you paint in those smaller areas. Making a little bit more of this red-orange color so that I can quickly drop it in. There we go, nice. A little variation in values, doing a little bit of lifting here. So I'm going to be painting in another area with my red-orange. I'm going to be painting this section here. Very carefully trying to leave that sliver of white paper unpainted along the edges. If you find that these first layers of paint are starting to dry too quickly for you, I would recommend making sure that you have enough water in your color mixtures over here. Make sure that your color mixtures are not super dry. Your color mixtures on your palette should have around 50% paint, 50% water in them so that you can effectively load up your paintbrush bristles and cover up sections quickly, and then continue running your paintbrush bristles over that same area a few times. That is also key, because if you don't take the time to run your paintbrush bristles over your different areas, then most likely than not, that paint is going to start drying very quickly because we're painting on dry paper. Dry paper is very thirsty and it's going to soak up that paint immediately when you place it on paper. And if your paper starts to dry, of course, when you try to drop in a second color or a little bit more of that same color on top of that, you're not going to have that soft, diffused out effect going on because that paint is already going to be dry. Remember that watercolor is only going to expand into paper that is wet, so you have to work relatively quickly and make sure that you effectively create that initial lightest layer and run your paintbrush bristles over it so that it stays wet for a little bit longer. So take a little bit longer with that initial layer, starting with another color. So I completely removed that red orange from my paintbrush bristles. I'm gonna go ahead and start with my blue-green. If you notice that your paint starts drying on your palette, make some more of your color. You may have a very small amount, or you maybe just have to activate that color again by bringing out a little bit of water onto your palette, doing your mixing in there, and then once it's watery enough, go ahead and load up your paintbrush bristles. This is still my size 10 round, by the way. How about painting in this large area right here? And I'm actually going to switch to my larger size 16 round because this is a larger area right here. So I'm gonna moisten up those bristles and I'm gonna go ahead and paint as quickly as I can. Don't worry if that kind of thing happens, just do your lifting with your absorbent towel and keep going. Otherwise, this paint is gonna start drying. Trying to work around this circle as best as I can. And if you find that you come way too close to your pencil lines, just no problem, leave in a little sliver of paper inside of that circle instead of outside. That is totally okay. With these larger areas, a lot of the times I am just going in with just water in my paintbrush. So after I've placed some amount of paint on paper, I swivel my paintbrush in my container of water and I just go in to do pulling of this paint and distribute it amongst this larger area. I don't want to go in with way too much color initially, because then if I go in with way too much saturated color, what happens is that that initial layer is very dark and I'm not going to be able to create lighter value areas where more of that paper is shining through that color. Right here I'm just going in with water in my paintbrush, running my paintbrush bristles over the entire thing. And once I've arrived at a nice even sheen all throughout this area, I am now going to be dropping in more of the same blue-green to darken certain sections and create that wider range of values and translucencies in this shape. All right, so I'm going to leave it at that. I'm not going to continue doing any more work in this area because I risk overworking it. So you can see how I've already arrived at nice, interesting wet on wet effects. And I also have a nice variation of blue-green values and translucencies all throughout. So I'm going to leave it be, and I'm going to start painting in other sections that are separate or far away from this section, which I can also make blue-green. I'm trying not to paint in sections that are side by side in the same color. So I'm gonna go ahead and maybe skip to maybe this area over here in the corner. Make that blue-green too. Again, running my paintbrush bristles over the entire thing. I need to make more of this blue-green color, so I'm gonna add in more of my blue and my green. So here's the undersea green added in. Gonna add in some of my phthalo blue. Nice juicy color mixture, and I'm gonna add in some deep blue-green here for a nice variation in values. There we go. That's enough color added in. So I'm gonna just absorb some excess paint and water that is pulling around those edges so that I don't get any backruns there. Nice. What other area can I make blue-green? Maybe this section here can be blue-green, this section here can be blue-green, this section here can be blue-green. I'm gonna change to my smaller paintbrush because I also want this section over here blue-green. You're gonna find that the pre-wetting that you do with that initial lighter layer of color is easier and quicker to do in smaller shapes. This one I painted in pretty quickly. Things are still pretty wet here, so if I wanted to go in and do some lifting with just a clean and slightly damp paintbrush, see, check that out. I was able to expose or have more of that paper shining through because I removed that color while it was still wet, and that's a great way to create variation in values and translucencies in your different areas. So one way to do it is by adding in more color to make certain sections darker, and another way to do it is by removing some of that color to make some sections lighter. So I think I'm going to go ahead and start painting in some red-purple areas. I'm going to use my larger paintbrush again, my size 16 round, and I am going to start by painting in this area right here with my red-purple, reactivating this little puddle of color. Remember, if you get little drops of paint as you're painting in quickly in areas that you weren't intending to get any splattering or drops in, just go in with your absorbent towel and lift that up. Painting in this area as quickly as I can. Gonna go in with this water in my paintbrush now, pulling that color into the larger area. I want to make sure that things stay relatively light with this first layer, that I don't get too saturated and deep too quickly. Otherwise, if everything is very dark right off the bat, I'm going to have a hard time developing that wide range of values that I want because everything is going to be too dark. When you're looking for a good range of values, lighter areas, mid-tone areas, darkest areas, It's very helpful to make sure that you're starting with a light layer initially, a pale layer of color, and then develop darker values on top of that. Okay, so I'm running my paintbrush bristles over the entire thing. Got way too close to my blue-green right here. That's okay. I can try to fix it later with a clean, very small brush once everything is dry. Right now I don't want to do anything because I can make things even worse. My light red-purple layer is in. Everything is nice and wet still and workable, so I'm making more of this red-purple color on my palette with my Quin Rose and my Ultramarine Blue. And I'm gonna go ahead and drop in more paint into certain areas. Nice variation in values there. When you're doing wet on wet effects like this, the paper that you're working on really makes a difference. If you're working on wood pulp paper, it can be more difficult to arrive at nice wet on wet effects because the paint is going to sit on the paper differently. It's going to be absorbed into that paper differently than when you're working on 100% cotton paper. So that's just something to have in mind. I am going to go ahead and change my water. This is getting pretty murky and I can risk this affecting my bright colors that I want to be using in this piece. Okay, here's my clean water. Red purple areas. So Quin Rose, I'm going to make more of my red purple. Quin Rose and Ultramarine Blue. I'm going to have to paint in this large circle with my red purple because it can't be red orange, it can't be blue green, and it can't be yellow green. So my only option really is red purple here. Really load up this paintbrush with a good amount of this red purple. I'm going to start painting in this area. Try my best to leave a white border around this circle, especially because this is a very large, prominent shape in this composition. Gonna work right up to my pencil lines here because I was able to keep a sliver of white paper protected when I was painting in the green circle. Going in with just water in my paintbrush. I'm gonna go in with just a clean and slightly damp paintbrush here to pick up this. Quickly, I'm gonna just swivel my paintbrush in my container of water, and I'm gonna come back to soften these edges before they dry completely. And I'm going to pull this color into this right side. Take a little bit more paint. I'm going to quickly continue painting here, filling up this entire shape as quickly as I can. All right, so everything all throughout this purple circle is still nice and wet because I've worked quickly. I'm not worrying too much about these little areas because I can fix those after everything has dried. Right now, it's important that I get all of the work done that I want to get done in the larger shape. Later on, I can do just minor refinements after everything has dried. Right now, if I try to continue fixing that, it's just going to lead to things looking worse. So there we go. Nice variation in values and translucencies in this large purple shape. And if I want to do any lifting, I can go in and do that at this point. All right, so I'm gonna leave that to dry completely, and then I'm gonna come back to do a little bit of cleanup work in this area especially. Oftentimes we can easily fix little mistakes like that, or at least make them less noticeable when working with watercolor, but it's very important to stay patient and ask yourself, should I wait a little bit longer for this to dry and fix it after everything has dried? I am going to paint this section right here red purple as well. Loading up my paintbrush bristles with my red purple and painting in this area. Working around that little circle there. I'm gonna work right up to my pencil work, my pencil lines here for this circle. Just like what I did with my blue-green right beside this shape. I drop in some more of my red purple. Nice range of red purple values or translucencies. I can leave that to dry. You can see how I've left a section of white paper around that green circle there. And for this circle over here, I did work all the way up to my pencil lines, just like I did over here, so that later on when I paint in these half circle shapes, I can leave in the white paper border around that half circle that I'm going to be painting in. As long as you leave some amount of paper unpainted in one of the sides of your pencil work, it's going to look great. These two edges right here so far have been the only ones that I kind of messed up that are touching, but when I come back after everything has dried at the end to try to fix little sections, I can go ahead and do a tiny bit of lifting there as well. I can show you how I do that later. Do a tiny bit of lifting before the paint dries. So this space right here, I can either paint in with blue-green or with green. So because it's a smaller shape, I'm going to change back to my size 10 round, and I'm going to go ahead and paint it in with my, I'm going to do blue-green. I know that we have another blue-green area to the left, but because it's just a kind of point there that is actually touching with the other shape, I'm kind of okay with that. Dropping in some more of my color while this initial layer is still wet. Once you are farther ahead in this painting process and you're left with these smaller shapes, you need to really start thinking about which color to use in these. Right here, for example, the only color that I can use is my yellow-green. Over here, I also have to use my yellow-green because I have my other three colors around that. And depending on the color scheme that you chose, you're going to have a different amount of colors. When you're using something like a complementary color scheme where you're only using two different colors, you have to find a way to make those sections look different from each other. So for example, if I were using just a red and a green for my complementary color scheme, well, I try something different from what I'm doing here, where I have 4 different colors. What I would do if I were just using 2 different colors, I would find a way to make my green shapes or areas look different from each other by painting in some sections with a more watered down green and other sections with a more saturated, thicker green, so that those green areas can look different from each other. And then the red areas as well. I would make sure to use my red in a more translucent state in some shapes, and then in a more saturated state in other shapes. I'm gonna have to make more of this yellow-green soon. Okay, so I ran my paintbrush bristles over this entire section a few times. I'm going to make more of my yellow-green very quickly before this dries. There we go. Okay, so what else do I need to do? Let me finish up with these two, and with these two I can make them red-orange, I can make them yellow-green, I could make this one red-purple and this one blue-green. Dropping in a little bit more of my green before this dries. I'm gonna jump on over to another section before I do this side over here, because if I'm not careful and I start painting in this side of the circle with another color and I accidentally touch that green that's still wet, that other color is going to start merging into my green. And if I don't want that to happen, I have to allow that to dry completely. So I'm gonna jump on over to another section here, perhaps this one. So I can't use blue-green, I can't use red-orange, and I can't use red-purple. So I'm gonna go ahead and use my green there. Getting closer to this pencil line. There we go. That's that yellow-green shape right there. Now I'm gonna tackle these two areas. So for this area here, I can make it blue-green or I can make it red-purple. So I'm gonna use blue-green. This green is already pretty dry, so I'm not going to have any merging happening. For this area, I can use my red-orange, I can use my red-purple, and I think I'm going to go ahead and use red-orange because that's the color that I've been using the least of. This is very watered down at this point, so I'm going to add in more color, get it slightly more saturated, and then drop in more color in a more saturated state here before this dries. Okay, so that's that. I'm just missing one area right here, and I can make this area green, I can make it red-orange, and that's about it because I have my red-purple over here and my blue-green over here. So I'm going to use my red-orange in that section too, just because it's the color that I've used least. Dropping in a tiny bit more of this red-orange. And there we go. So I'm gonna leave this to dry completely, and after everything has dried, I'm gonna come back to try to clean up some little imperfections here and there with some gentle scrubbing and lifting. All right, so everything is pretty dry at this point. I changed my water because I don't want to do any scrubbing with dirty water. And feel free to use an even smaller detailing brush if you want to for this kind of scrubbing in these very, very narrow areas. I'm gonna go in with a clean and only slightly damp paintbrush, and I'm gonna do gentle scrubbing with just the tip of my paintbrush to remove at least some amount of that purple from that edge. I'm gonna clean my paintbrush bristles, dab the tip of my paintbrush on my absorbent towel to remove that excess water. I'm gonna go in with my absorbent towel. See how I'm at least able to remove some amount of that purple from my paper? You're not gonna be able to go back to the whiteness the paper once had in the beginning. So don't continue scrubbing and scrubbing, just remove a tiny bit to make that error or mistake look a little bit less noticeable, and then just leave it at that. Do any scrubbing that you might need to do very gently and very minimally. Don't continue scrubbing and scrubbing and scrubbing, because if you do, you're going to start damaging your watercolor paper. Accept the fact that you're not going to be able to go back to the whiteness and the brightness the paper once had. Just remove some amount of that color to make that mistake look just less noticeable, and leave it at that. I'm going to try to do the same thing right here. Just remove some of this purple along this edge. My absorbent towel is pretty soaked already, but and you're going to be able to lift certain colors up more than others because different colors have different staining properties. So you might find that you're able to lift up some colors more easily than others. And you are probably also going to find, as you continue exploring different types of watercolor paper, that some types of paper allow more for this kind of technique than others. Can't do much more scrubbing or I risk damaging my paper, but at least I was able to remove some of that purple and leave some more of that paper shining through in that very narrow section, okay? All right, so I'm all done with this abstract piece. I'm gonna go ahead and remove the masking tape. Make sure that everything is completely dry before you attempt to remove any masking tape, artist tape, or whatever it is that you're using to tape your watercolor paper down. And there we go, I'm all finished with this abstract watercolor piece. I'm pretty happy with the results. I think that the piece looks well balanced. I think it looks harmonious, and this is also in large part due to the fact that I used a specific color scheme. And it certainly helped me practice my watercolor washes and my nice, soft, wet on wet techniques.